Welcome to the Stanford Silicon Valley New Japan Project Public Forum Series. Today's talk is something that everybody here at an educational institution is interested in, which is an education strategy for innovation and entrepreneurship in Japan. And it's really, really exciting to be able to introduce the Stanford eJapan program. But first, a couple words about the Stanford Silicon Valley New Japan project. We are a platform for sustained interaction between Stanford and Silicon Valley and Japan so that each side can harness the good parts of the other. And we have several key components. One is a public forum series with networking. Please, after this talk, network amongst yourselves and meet each other. And after the today's public forum, we're going to send around an email where you can opt in and share any information that you want to on your business card, so that if you didn't have a chance to see or meet each person, but you want to follow up later, you can do that. And it's an opt-in spreadsheet. So, a public forum series with networking research activities on our website at stanford-svnj.org, or if you just search Stanford Silicon Valley New Japan Project, it'll show up. Actually, this week we just posted a new paper called Innovation and Entrepreneurship in Japan, Why Japan parentheses still matters in global competition. And this kind of research activity we keep doing: policy analysis and implementation, research collaborations with places like UC Berkeley, the European Union, and Keio University School of Media Design. And there's going to be a new bullet point there once we work more closely as the educational outreach. And so we're excited to start our collaboration with the Stanford project on international and cross-cultural education. So that's the project, and our project would not be possible without the generous support of several companies. So we sincerely thank them: Kozo Keikaku Engineering, Future Architect, Komatsu, Mistletoe, Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, World Innovation Lab, ANA, Canon, KPMG Azusa, SMBC, Rakuten, Tech Firm Group, NIDO, Mitsubishi Corporation, and the Development Bank of Japan. So thank you very much for supporting our project and activities. So without further ado, that was the introduction, and we're going to have two portions. I'm going to talk about 20 minutes about a few things about education in Japan and some skills that are useful for people. And then we're going to pass the baton to Gary Mukai, who's the main. I'm going to tee up Gary so that he can hit it home run out of the stands and make everybody interested in the eJapan program. So here's my tee up. I'm Kenji Kushida, by the way. I'm a research scholar here, and I'm the project leader of the Stanford Silicon Valley New Japan project. So there are many challenges facing Japan. The demographic change is a big one, right? Everybody else is looking at Japan for the population curve, where there are so many healthy older people, so many not so healthy older people, and fewer younger people. And so the demographic challenge is big. No advanced industrial country has ever gotten even close to the situation that Japan is seeing, except for Korea. And they're both hurtling towards unprecedented territory. The need for innovation and entrepreneurship. Lots and lots of companies from Japan now realize that this is very critical. They are also coming to Silicon Valley, and they're realizing that this is the kind of thing that we need for survival. And now it's credible because big established companies like Sharp, well, they got bought by Foxconn. Big established companies like Toshiba ended up buying very bad assets, and one of the biggest accounting scandals, and it's imploding. So these big, stable industrial titans of Japan look extremely vulnerable. And so to survive, we need more innovation and entrepreneurship. This is clear. Almost everybody agrees that this is the case. Nobody says we don't need less innovation. But the problem is these discussions often end up in, well, here are these challenges. We need to change the education system for these reasons, and this is why the education system needs to change and all of this. But the problem is that the educational system change doesn't happen from discussions about innovation and entrepreneurship. These are different sets of people talking. The entrepreneurs and the people who are doing innovation in big companies, the people who are became very wealthy from investing, etc., and saying, yes, we need change in Japan. These are not the same people that are actually doing the educational change in universities, in the government, and places like this. There's a big disconnect. So the question for us looking from here is, what are some concrete actions we can take? We can talk about it, we can wring our hands about it, but what can we actually do? So, and of course, reforming education is, in Japan particularly, is a slow process. As we're seeing in the US, reforming as a slow process is not always a bad thing. Looking at what public education is, what's happening to public education here in the US, say, for example, the restrictions, the regulations on nutritional content for school lunches is about to be rolled back, right? So you have to have fruits, you have to have a certain amount of vegetables, etc. Oh, that's a regulation, let's roll that back. That's about to pass. This is not good. So fast change is not always good. But slow change, when everybody knows the direction that you want to change in, this is also a challenge. Japan's facing the latter. So you can work through the government, through deliberation councils, you can work through educational institutions offering new classes. Lots of universities have startup incubators. There are waves of new universities that have, a few new universities, and many existing universities have set up liberal arts or English education faculty sort of departments. Places like Ritsumeikan, Waseda, Keio, Ritsumeikan set up its own new university called Asia Pacific University. Waseda and Keio each have new well, Waseda has a new mini campus and a program, and Keio has a new program. And English language education in primary education, elementary schools. This is the kind of educational reform that's happening. And the usual questions of, well, how do you teach English in elementary schools when the teachers, how do the teachers learn English to be able to teach it? These kinds of big questions that don't scale very easily. This kind of thing slows it down. But of course, there are some promising changes. I do not want to point that I'm tired of listening to talks about, oh, Japan doesn't change and education, it doesn't change. Lots of change is happening. It's just happening at the margins, and Japan's a big country, and so these changes don't sweep so rapidly. For example, the dean of Hitotsubashi University, one of the oldest, most prestigious sort of management, commerce-oriented universities, the former Imperial University, well, they had for a dean in their business school, essentially, Christina Amagin, who happens to be the mother of our research assistant here, Elin. But anyway, she was the first female, most university deans don't look like this. They're not women and they're not foreign. And also in Kyorin University in Western Tokyo, Robin Sakamoto, her husband, is Japanese. She's the Dean of Foreign Studies. And there's a long list of new liberal arts colleges and programs in Japan that have been set up. Junko Hibiya, who's the president of ICU, gave a talk here at A-Park last March. And it's quite a list of changes. New faculties being set up where instruction is in English, lots of professors are being hired, etc. So there is change happening. And by the way, a lot of hand-wringing goes on about, oh, Japanese are not studying abroad the way they used to. The numbers are dropping. And I hear this conversation a lot. And so I decided to look at the numbers. And so the number of students studying abroad has decreased. Yes, there's a decrease. And if you make the time horizon longer, it is a decrease. And there actually is a recent uptick, although this recent uptick might be an artifact of the data, because the data source is not consistent. It just might be counting differently. But the number of people declining makes sense because the number of college-age students is declining. So is it really the measure that we need to be looking at? Maybe we should look at the proportion of Japanese students studying abroad of the total population of college-age Japanese people. There it looks a little different. It looks, and eventually we'll get more data on this, but it's not this precipitous decline because there are fewer people. However, from the receiving end here, compared to, say, Chinese or Korean students, the proportion of Japanese is relatively smaller and smaller because there's a big influx of others. So when people say, oh, there are fewer number of people studying abroad, therefore Japanese are inward-looking, the students don't want to live abroad, etc., etc. Well, there might be some of that. But it's also depends, your impression might change depending on which numbers you look at, so let's be careful of that. Of course there's going to be a decline unless proportionally there's a big rise. And so And after what happened to United Airlines the other day, it's not that, traveling in Japan is a very comfortable experience, and very bad things have to happen before you get anywhere close to approaching what happened the other day. And so you could understand if you're a student, do I really want to study? So it's not necessarily just an inward-looking sort of cultural issue that needs to be addressed. That being said, the numbers are pretty small. Japanese students studying at Stanford University, there are about 8,000 undergraduate students in Stanford and about 10,000 graduate students. And these numbers don't come out very easily, but when Prime Minister Abe visited Stanford, they did give us these numbers. And so there were 10 undergraduates who were Japanese citizens and 53 graduate students in 2015. 2016, there are 60 Japanese students. And the total number of students, Japanese students in the US, yeah, that's this, are 19,000. Well, we'll look over time and see. That's decreasing, but then again, we need to look at the proportion. Interestingly, more Japanese citizens are living abroad than ever before. Because there's aggressive foreign direct investment from Japanese companies buying companies abroad or investing abroad, and they need to transfer employees there. Many of the employees' families don't go with the employees, but many of the families do go. So we don't have good numbers on how many families have gone. That's a topic for a little more analysis. But it's pretty dramatic. In about 20 years, we've almost doubled the number of Japanese citizens living abroad. Surely the number of Japanese kids growing up abroad has increased too. So more Japanese kids growing abroad will have a different perspective than Japanese kids who are raised in Japan. And this is only on the increase. So outbound M&A or FDI, everything basically looks like an upward curve. And so here's a framework that I've written about that I recommend for understanding change in Japan, because you see media articles that scratch the surface all the time. One type of media article says, look at so much change. There's so much change happening. Another type of media article says, look, there's no change happening. Everything is sort of stasis, and look how difficult it is to change things. Both things are true. The model of change in Japan often tends to follow what we call syncretism. Syncretism is originally a word used for something like religion that goes into a new place. There are pre-existing practices, the new thought goes on top of that, and then it melds and becomes something slightly more different and hybrid. For example, Catholicism in the Philippines is a little different from Catholicism in Rome. And so there are, say, little brown baby figurines in an altar wearing the Pope's clothes called the Santo Niño. It's baby Jesus. I've never seen that outside the Philippines. I think there might have been something originally there. And say, why are they wearing the Pope's robes? And well, he's the King of Kings. That's interesting. I've never heard that explanation. So things are different. What I'm trying to say is that there was a post-war Japanese model of capitalism, the political economy, and there was a post-war fairly stable set of social norms. And then change started to happen, accelerating after the bubble burst. So then change in the form of, say, new practices, new businesses, they came into Japan, but they will not cause sudden, complete change. Right? Some areas will be new. There will be new sectors, say the IT industry. Google's a big employer in Japan now. The inside of a Google office in Japan looks a lot more like Google here than it does to the office just down the block that's a very traditional Japanese office. So the traditional Japanese businesses still often look very traditional Japanese, but they're right next to very new areas. So there's the traditional, and regional banks, for example, haven't changed very much, and small stores often haven't changed. And then there's the hybrid. So and it's not that everything becomes hybrid. It's the coexistence of, look, here's something that's new, here's something that's traditional, and here's a hybrid element. And all of these things coexist. So of course, if you look at different places and you look just at there, you see very different things. So educational change is following the same, I'd posit that the educational change is following the same pattern. There are a bunch of new things happening. There are a bunch of new alternative schools being set up. There are new international schools being set up. And at the same time, some traditional places are remaining very traditional. And there are hybrid places where existing universities are trying to make new departments in the ways that we've seen earlier. So syncretism. And this is where we want to affect change. Because if you want to change something, it's useful to know how you're going to change it. And to know how you're going to change it, it's useful to have a mechanism in your head of how things do change. So when we go, are we looking to try to change traditional things into new things? Are we going to try to make new things? Or are we going to just try to push hybrid more? And so that's where we're going. And a few thoughts that I have on basically that starts to fit with the theme of the Stanford program on international and cross-cultural education, the cross-cultural part. A few years ago, I wrote a book called Biculturalism and the Japanese. Sort of. The whole, it's called Bicultural to Nihonjin. And the whole point is that you can't directly translate the title into English. But is it the Japanese? Is it bicultural? Biculturalism? But that's the point. It was motivated by my seeing a lot of Japanese from, I've been in Silicon Valley for 20 years now, and there were very, very high-level people who really weren't getting much traction. And I was trying to figure out why. Part of it is, of course, corporate strategy, and the company's not giving them the resources or opportunities. But the other part was, I was seeing that there were some serious communication problems. And so why are people having so much trouble communicating? And then I realized that it was probably the difference between the thought process of what is bilingual versus bicultural, a conceptual difference. I'll explain that in the next slide. And how to overcome that. And that adaptability is the key. So, Bicultural to Nihonjin. It's on a Kindle book later. So, or if you want to look at it later. What is bicultural or multicultural? Let's just call it bicultural because it's easier to say than multicultural. But what I mean is multicultural. There's a common misunderstanding of what is bilingual, especially from Japanese. Bilingual, what is? The image that people have is, oh, this person is extremely bilingual. That means in Japan, they're completely Japanese. And then when they come over here, they can suddenly say, so in Japan, they would say, oh, hello, my name is Kushida, hajimemashite, this and that. And then give the two-handed name card. And then when they come here, they say, hi, I'm Kenji, how are you? With a strong handshake and this. And they say, oh, that's a very bilingual person. That's not bilingual. You can also have extremely bilingual. If you take bilingual to mean the technical ability to speak the language and the vocabulary and the vocabulary and grammar skills, then you can have something like a very well-respected professor who comes, a senior professor who comes here. He's written a beautifully written in English academic paper, and he's going to present the paper. And the audience is a mix of graduate students and Stanford graduate students and faculty and professors and researchers. And they start to read the paper. And in many disciplines like political science that we do here, you do not read your paper, even if the English is good. You talk about your paper. And then partway through, when you start going, here's my assumption. I'm thinking that this, and then somebody says, oh, excuse me, a graduate student who wants to appear like he's a superstar, and maybe he is going to be a superstar. Excuse me, your assumption doesn't make sense. In fact, if your assumption doesn't make sense, then what you're saying is not true, and I don't see why you're doing this project. Or I went through your equation, but your assumption here, if I change the parameters into something that's more realistic, I get the opposite answer. And they've just done that on the back of an envelope. Very senior Japanese professor has never had this experience of being questioned 3 minutes into his talk by somebody so young who hasn't established themselves, let alone in English. Okay, they don't know how to deal with it. And then the way these things happen, people get emboldened. As soon as somebody asks a difficult question, then the other people start to ask questions, and your paper gets shredded, and all of your assumptions and your analysis and all of this. And well, partway through, you can see the poor Japanese professor just breaking down. He can't handle it. Is he not bilingual enough? Oh, he's completely bilingual. It's fine. His English is fantastic. Is he bicultural? No, absolutely not. He did not have any idea that he was going to get this kind of treatment here, and he didn't understand how the sociocultural communication works for, say, US academic presentations. Or in the business context, many of you might have had this. You go to a business meeting, it's 30 minutes, you've tried very hard to get a meeting with this person, you want to talk about your company. You go in, and the 30-minute meeting, 29 and a half minutes, the person talks. They keep talking, and saying, oh, and then the meeting is done. And you say, well, that person didn't let me say anything. And your counterpart, person from Silicon Valley, saying, well, what a boring person, they don't say anything. And saying, but there was no space to say anything. For that kind of thing, you have to interrupt. Right? If the person is always going to talk and there's no space for you to go back and forth, you have to interrupt them. It's not rude, it's okay. But it's not a rule of, oh, in the US, it's okay, you need to interrupt everybody. That's not true either. If you have a conversational style that goes back and forth, it's terribly rude to interrupt. So what kind of conversation is this? You have to figure that out. That's not really about your bilingual skills. It's about your bicultural, multicultural skills. So it's not just language skills, but sociocultural adaptability. And so, but many people have this issue of if they're not communicating the way they want to, then they study more English, more vocabulary, more grammar, etc. And this doesn't necessarily help either. So English language ability, which is technical, versus sociocultural adaptability, bilingual, bicultural. So two different axes. My crackpot theory is that communication skills, you need to have both knowledge, technical knowledge of the language, and sociocultural adaptability. And the reason that this is weird, it looks weird, which is done on purpose, is that most English presentations never have the font going vertical, but all Japanese do, right? It's these little things that count. So again, a lot of, I'm going to go take it a step further, right? Most people want to go to a high-level bilingual, bicultural place, but that's not necessarily a better. It's just one image. I'm not making a normative argument saying, look, everybody has to be highly bilingual, bicultural. No, no. There's beauty in having a monocultural, monolingual person. And one of Japan's popular culture famous people is a character called Tora-san from a long-running movie series. There were something like 50 movies. And he's very traditional Japanese. He's a very people's person, and the beauty is that he doesn't change. Japan has modernized, it gets cultural, but he's sort of in an old cultural, every culture has this kind of thing. He represents the old culture, the good things about being an old culture. That's fine, that's beautiful, but you wouldn't send him to do international negotiations. So there's a set of people, again, this is bilingual and bicultural, so sociocultural adaptability is the vertical axis. I've seen the inside of several, say, foreign firms in Japan in finance. And the Japanese employees there, I was shocked because they were communicating very effectively, but their English wasn't actually very good. It was not their skills their vocabulary was limited and their grammar was terrible, but somehow they were communicating very effectively because their sort of tempo and the way they communicate fit exactly the corporate culture. And this was finance, so it was rather aggressive and back and forth very rapidly, etc. And so I realized actually you don't necessarily have such a huge technical need, but if your social cultural adaptability is pretty high, then actually you can communicate pretty well. And most Japanese salarymen and business people are here. Their social cultural adaptability is lower, but they don't realize that there's this other axis they have to work on. But their technical skill is higher than they think it is, but they're not communicating as effectively as they would like to because it's the vertical axis that they don't have enough of. So some merits of this, if we get to this kind of set of skills, whenever you go into a new cultural context, you're playing an away game. You're not quite sure what the rules of the game are, what the rules of engagement is, what other norms are there. You have to figure out what they are. You got to get an insider perspective. So the speed and depth of rapid adaptability to unexpected situations goes a lot more smoothly if you've done this kind of thing before. And it's useful in a variety of multicultural contexts. And so one of the big good things about that is you're less likely to fall into the traps of thinking through stereotypes. Oh, these people do this. And then you observe some of those behaviors and say, yeah, it's because these people do this. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just this group of people. It's, oh, Americans do this or that is a favorite Japanese stereotype. Hey, Americans do, well, as this past election shows, there are many kinds of Americans who held very different worldviews and how society ought to be, etc. So which groups of people are you talking about? And again, for international business, this is useful because it leads to perhaps a better understanding, just a sensibility of, you see something really interesting, and you're not sure, is that specifically interesting because you're in the context, or will it be interesting out of the context too? Is it really cool because in Japan it's considered cool, or is this something that a lot of people around the world would actually probably find cool? And how do you get those opinions? So some of the things within Japan that people think should go global actually don't. Sometimes there's a business logic, others it's a cultural logic. And other things that Japanese think, really, this gets popular? It actually becomes a global hit. But if you're a highly bicultural set of, or if you have a team that has a high level bicultural, multicultural talent, maybe it's easier to identify these kinds of things. This would work in Silicon Valley. Or my company's headquarters sent me this presentation material about what our company does, but I'm pretty sure that this won't work to try to get friends in Silicon Valley. This kind of thing. So, and of course it's a matter of degree. It's not a dichotomy between up to this point you're not completely native, and once you're past this point you're completely native English. No, it's just a matter of degree, because people, again, perfectionism can get in the way of just adaptability, and it's not a core competence in of itself. One of the traps that some people fall into, especially foreign firms going into Japan, the first set of people they meet are Japanese people who are very good at English, and they think, oh yeah, we can communicate very well. Those might not be the best people who can do the work. Their English is good, but that's their core competence. Maybe you need somebody who can communicate in English who also has a core competence of the competence you need. So that's another thing. So then the process of becoming highly bicultural, this is after just talking to several hundred people and observing people, there seems to be this process in common. You have sociocultural context 1. For example, you're born and raised in Japan. And then you have an insider's vantage, because of course that's where you're from. Then you go to a new sociocultural context. First you have an outsider experience. Why do people do this? Why do they do that? Why is the checkout at a grocery store so slow here? I don't understand. And then after a while you start to understand, oh, that's why the way they've cut costs is to cut people and pay the people very little, and so most of them are very unhappy and not very motivated, and so they'll do that, except for other stores that are. So you start to get an insider experience. So you start as an outsider, and then you start to gain an insider perspective. But that's not enough. Then you go back, and then you realize that you've gotten an outsider perspective of where you originally came from. It's called the reverse culture shock, right? Oh, actually, I've never noticed that Japanese supermarkets, the checkout register is so fast. These people go so fast and they're so efficient. That's amazing. I never noticed this until I went away and came back. This kind of thing, but applied to every aspect of society and organization. So then what you actually have is not just an insider perspective of your own place and an outsider's perspective of somewhere else and an insider perspective somewhere else. You also have an outsider perspective of where you first came from. So I call it the double insider-outsider perspective. Two insider and outsider's perspectives of each, because then you can understand hidden biases and stereotypes and things like this. When you hear, after, say, living in the US for a while, you go back to Japan, and some people who are very respectable are saying, oh, well, Americans are this or that. And you're thinking, well, that's not at all what my experience was. Yeah, America is a crime-ridden, very scary place. Well, maybe you think that if you have lived, as I did for a while, in, say, certain parts of Oakland. But then if you live here for a while, that's not your impression at all. Well, maybe both things are true. But then what's the politics that are moving society? So this kind of thing. So it's just a few, and I'm going to wrap up after this, a few skills to sort of focus on what the sociocultural adaptability axis, the bicultural axis is. What are the cultural aspects included in communication? This is not just, well, this encompasses all sorts of things, including terminology, right? So, for example, the global financial crisis of 2007, 2008. In Japan, this is referred to as the Lehman shock. And they say, oh yeah, when the Lehman shock hit. And you say, well, here we don't say that. It's, the Lehman shock was one of the outcomes, but it was not, that's not what it's referred to as. Or 9/11. Here people will say, oh yeah, remember 9/11, this or that happened. 9/11, well, 3/11 was the 2011 March 11 disaster, but 9/11, in Japan, it's called the simultaneous multiple terrorism attacks. And some dignitaries who came here who wanted to, in maybe a few months later or up to a year later, they would say, oh yeah, we'd like to express our sincerest condolence on the simultaneous multiple terrorist attacks in the US. And some of the audience are thinking, well, what's that? And so this kind of thing, cultural aspects, and tempo and nuance. Of conversation, right, and patterns of how conversations proceed. Do you start with the conclusion or do you build up to the conclusion? And what is the opponent, what is the other side expecting? If you get it the opposite, it can be terribly shocking if your conclusion comes first, or it can be terribly boring if they're waiting for your conclusion at the end. And how to debate, how to negotiate, right? Are they being rude? Are they attacking you as a person or just your ideas? And how can you tell one or the other? Sometimes they don't. And broader context of cultural approaches to ideas, for example, in the US, you don't speak of, say, the Pearl Harbor bombing lightly. Different people have very strong thoughts about this or that. And it gets kind of interesting in classrooms, things like this. And adaptability is the key. So the ability to, if you walk into a room and try to figure out, okay, what's the situation? What are some of the variables at play? Because if you come from one place, you don't recognize that actually all these socio-cultural aspects are actually variables. And then if you go around different places, you can actually see what the values of those variables are. So these are the kinds of skills that are, I'm going to do the same thing. Wouldn't it be nice if the Japanese educational system focused on a little bit of this? And then the usual discussion is, yes, we need to do that, end of story. But that's not where change happens. We need to start it. So some of the things, and I'm going to tee up Gary on this, the E-Japan program brings to the table some outsider's perspectives, to be able to get from within Japan an outsider perspective, and critical thinking skills. Well, why is that? If there's not a correct answer, how do you think about it? But how do you think about it in a structured way? And thinking in English as a tool, not just learning English, and opportunities for discussion, which can also lead to immersion in different learning cultures. What do you mean there's discussion about this kind of thing? So, with that tee up, it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gary Mukai, who is the director of the Stanford Program on International and Cross-Cultural Education, SPICE, at Stanford University. I have a really, really long bio here, because he's so distinguished, so I'm going to just use the two-paragraph version. Prior to joining SPICE in 1988, he actually spent some time being a teacher in Gunma Prefecture, Japan, and then California public schools. His academic interests include curriculum and instruction, educational equity, and teacher professional development. And he's a graduate of UC Berkeley and Stanford University. And he has many, many awards and things under his belt, and I'd just like to mention one of them. In 2007, he was the recipient of the Foreign Minister's Commendation from the Japanese government for the promotion of mutual understanding between Japan and the United States, especially in the field of education. And in 2015, he was selected as the recipient of the Stanford Alumni Award by the Asian American Activities Center Advisory Board. And he's also been a longtime interviewer of Japan Exchange and the JET program, the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, and a member of JET Alumni Association of Northern California. He's really spent several decades. You've spent a long time and been a cornerstone of really cross-cultural education here at Stanford. Everybody looks to SPICE for its, and you've been a great promoter of Japan and learning about Japan here with the launch of, particularly with the launch of the 2003 Reischauer Scholars Program, which is a distance learning course on Japan to US high school students. And in 2015, SPICE launched the Stanford E-Japan, which was a distance learning program on the United States and US-Japan relations for high school students in Japan. So we're very much looking forward to learning more about that. Thank you, Gary.
I met Kenji in 1997. It's hard to believe that 20 years have already passed, over 20 years. And since I met him, he hasn't changed at all. But when I think about the 20 years and remember that my hair was black, I realized, indeed, a lot of time has gone by. But Kenji's become one of my all-time favorite colleagues here at Stanford. I'd like to thank Amanda Stuckich and Elin Matsumae for helping me prepare for today's presentation. While I was preparing for this talk, I was reflective of the fact that it's been actually over 40 years since I went to teach English in Gunma Prefecture, which Kenji mentioned. And Takeo Fukuda was the Prime Minister, and Jimmy Carter was the President of the United States. And since my teaching years, I've been reflective of two experiences that I had that have stayed with me for my entire career in teaching and also here at Stanford University. So the first one was when I first got to Gunma Prefecture, and one of my assignments was to work with girls at Ota Girls High School. And I heard that they were really excited because an American was coming to teach them English. And then I later learned that they were imagining someone like Paul Newman or Robert Redford, who was very popular at the time, walking in their door. And to their great disappointment, I arrived. That stuck with me for a long time. And then in 1982, I was teaching first grade in Mountain View. And I had a student named Sean who sat in the front row. And we had, I thought, a very good relationship. And annually, we would have to meet with parents, these parent-teacher conferences. And Sean's parents didn't show up for one of the parent conferences. So I rescheduled, and they didn't come again. So I was really worried, so I asked Sean, is everything okay? I was hoping to see your parents yesterday. And so Sean looked down, and I could tell that something was wrong. And he said they didn't want to see me because I'm Japanese. And that really surprised me because I thought, our relationship was great. And there were other first grade classrooms. So he could have been pulled out to go to another classroom at the beginning of the year, but that didn't happen. When he went to the second grade, his parents showed up for parent conferences. And so these two things have really stuck with me through the years, and it's really shaped my work in the field of trying to improve US-Japan relations, the understanding between students in Japan and students in the United States specifically. So just very briefly, SPICE, which Kenji mentioned, works in three areas. So first, we develop supplementary curriculum for schools in the United States. Though these curriculum materials are actually used around the world, in particular at independent schools abroad, like the American school in Japan. Second, we conduct teacher professional development seminars. So we work with teachers and we help them better understand certain international issues. And we also help them with areas framed around pedagogical content knowledge. So interactive ways of working with students. And then third, we teach online courses. And as Kenji mentioned, we started to teach a course called the Reischauer Scholars Program, now in its 14th year, to help high school students in the United States better understand Japan, and with a heavy focus on US-Japan relations. And as also Kenji mentioned, we teach a course to high school students in Japan about US society and culture and US-Japan relations. That's a newer program. By the way, we also teach a course called the Sejong Korean Scholars Program to high school students in the United States. And we're about to launch a course called the China Scholars Program as well. So today I'll speak for 20 minutes So the agenda for today, first I'm going to briefly talk about the Reischauer Scholars Program, because that was our inaugural course in the area of distance learning education. The instructor is Naomi Funahashi. And post-Japanese economic bubble, we noticed some declining interest in the study of Japan here at Stanford, but also at the pre-collegiate level. So interest in Japanese language, for example, at the high school level started to decline. And so I spoke with a program officer at the United States-Japan Foundation, David James, and we decided to launch a course for high school students in the United States about Japan and US-Japan relations, with hopes that we could help to build up greater interest in Japan and US-Japan relations. And it's a distance learning course that involves video lectures, but also virtual classrooms where they actually talk to scholars. And as I go through the slides for Stanford e-Japan, you'll get an idea of what the Reischauer Scholars Program looks like as well. By the way, currently there are 15 alumni of the Reischauer Scholars Program here at Stanford University. And we think that enrollment in the course can help with college admissions. Second, the overview of Stanford e-Japan, I'm going to go more into depth. And the instructor is Waka Takahashi Brown. Both Waka and Naomi are credentialed high school teachers. And I believe that Stanford e-Japan really helps to support Japan's efforts to internationalize the curriculum at the high school level. It's one of the reasons why we created it. There are many efforts on the part of the government, for example, the JET program, which Kenji mentioned. An effort to not only help students better their understanding of English, but also to better understand the world. Right? There are lots of Americans and others who go to Japan to teach language in a cultural context. Some of you may know about Super Global High School Initiative, whereby the government awards special funding to high schools that qualify for this status. So it's programs like that that we're hoping to support. And we're currently in the third year of our 3-year grant from the United States-Japan Foundation that supports this program, Stanford e-Japan. And I will discuss Stanford e-Japan more in depth in my presentation. And third, scalability. I'd like to hear your thoughts during the question and answer period on the scalability of a program like Stanford e-Japan. And hopefully we could do this during the time that we have remaining. Before we launched the Stanford e-Japan program, we conducted a 10-year tracer study. So we contacted students in the Reischauer Scholars Program from the first 10 years. And we conducted surveys and interviews. And here are some of the findings. And we use these to help us map out a possible program for high school students in Japan. So first, we found that participation in the Reischauer Scholars Program positively impacted high school students' academic records. For them to have a course from Stanford University, right, in their application to college seems to help many of them. Second, we found that it helps increase or sustain their interest in Japan and US-Japan relations. Because by following up later, we found out they took courses in college, and also some applied to the JET program. Some pursued interest in Japanese corporations and things like that. And we believe we had an impact on their critical thinking skills. Kenji spoke about this earlier. And then finally, among the criticisms, some of the students felt that the course should focus more on contemporary issues. We covered quite a bit of history in the course. And so this helped us in some ways also shape our course for high school students in Japan. Though obviously it's important to set historical context for the introduction of a country or a bilateral relationship. So we have an advisory committee which consists of Japanese and Americans, including the Consul General of Japan in San Francisco. And actually, Consul Ichioka, who is here today, he's the director of the Japan Information and Cultural Center. He and others at the consulate have been a huge support, as well as Kenji and many scholars here at Stanford University. Now, the methods of instruction for Stanford e-Japan are very similar to the Reischauer Scholars Program. So they're given weekly assigned readings. In the case of Stanford e-Japan students, we decided to require short answer to homework assignments, unlike for the students in the United States, because this course is taught in English. Okay? And then they're required to watch videotaped lectures. So this is asynchronous. They could do this Sunday night or whenever they choose to. Okay? And there are also discussion forums, and I'll show you an example of this in my presentation. So the students have a chance to not only talk with scholars or communicate with scholars, but to communicate amongst themselves. And then I mentioned the virtual classrooms. So we actually engage the students enrolled in the program live with scholars in the United States. Okay? And I'll give you an example of that as well. And then they're required to do a major research project and to make presentations somewhere in their community. It could be at their school. It could be at City Hall. It could be at a library. Okay? So those are the methods of instruction. And the participants from spring of 2016, so we offer this course twice per year, are from these schools. And you could see that you know, the geographic diversity is fairly wide. We're trying to expand it. Students have to apply to get into this course. They have to submit their grades. They have to write a statement of purpose. Why do you want to enter this course? And they also have to have 2 letters of recommendation. One from their English teacher, who has to comment on, you know, the student's ability with English, because there's a lot of, all of the instruction is in English. And then from another teacher about his or her academic abilities. We usually choose between 25 to 28 students per course. And the reason why we limit it is because these students talk to the scholars. And usually the virtual classrooms are only an hour. So we want to limit the number of students in the course. The Ministry of Education, MEXT, has been very supportive in that they help us publicize this course to schools. JET program participants from the United States also help us publicize the program to various parts of Japan. So they help me and my colleagues identify students with strong English skills, right? Strong intellectual skills, and encourage them to apply. And you'll notice this high school, Kaisei, it's a very, very prestigious boys' high school in Japan. I believe it, you know, it's the highest ranked in terms of the number of students it sends to Tokyo University. And so earlier this year, I met with an alum of Stanford e-Japan who got into Tokyo University. He got into the medical field, so very, very difficult. And I asked him, why did you apply for our course? Because you're at this very prestigious high school. Obviously, you're going to go to a great university, and you're probably really busy preparing for exams. Why would you take our course? And what he said really surprised me. He said that he felt that Stanford Japan helped him get into Tokyo University. I said, why is that the case? You know, are you tested on this content? But his reply was that there was a English listening comprehension as part of the entrance examination. So, so that really helped me rethink Stanford Japan, and it seems to be, you know, quite popular among high schools, you know, that are very, very prestigious in Japan, and parts of that surprised me. Does anyone know? Is it a private? Thank you for that. And so the fall course, 2016, you can see here. And what I would like to mention here is you'll notice many high schools that are affiliated with universities, like Waseda or Keio. And if you are at these high schools, you're pretty much assured entrance into these universities. So I also wondered about this. Why take on extra work, right? If in fact Stanford Japan really won't help your, you know, ability to get into these universities. But nonetheless, many students from these affiliated high schools are interested and signing up for our course, both at the private school, in the private schools, and also at places like Tsukuba, which is the public, so, but it also has an affiliated high school. So this actually surprised me a lot, and it encouraged me because it said to me that there's interest. And among these students, many want to come to the United States for graduate school. So that seems to be a strong motivation as well. So the learning management system that we use is widely used at Stanford University, and it's called Canvas. So students, and students, of course, the teacher Waka uses this, regularly. And you could see here. You could see here that the assignment was to read a letter from Ambassador Carolyn Kennedy before their class. So we have support from Ambassador Kennedy, now former ambassador to Japan, and Ambassador Sasae. So we're very encouraged by the support we're receiving from both governments. And here's a listing of the topics and speakers from the 2016 course. We're currently teaching a course right now, and it's changed a bit. But you'll notice that it includes scholars from Stanford, scholars from other universities, and something I like to point out is this topic here, US high schools. What we decided to do in this case was, instead of having a scholar talk to the students about high school life in the United States, we decided to have the Reischauer scholars, their peers in the United States, talk about their high school experience to the Japanese. And that has really become very popular. So we're doing more of that now in the current course. Okay. All of the speakers challenge students to think critically about these topics. Diverse perspectives are presented. This is very supportive of what Dr. Kushida just spoke about. And we also challenge their extant understandings, right? So it's quite interesting when you introduce a topic like the atomic bombings or Pearl Harbor, and students on either side are surprised to hear about the other side's perspective, right? But this is, I believe, very invaluable to the students. And to prepare for work in Silicon Valley, you know, they need to be very aware that there are diverse perspectives, right? So that's something that's really key to what we do. And one of our most popular video lectures is by Dr. Kushida. And you know, in addition to watching his lecture, we provide transcripts to the students. Because, again, for almost all of them, English is their second language. We have some who have fluency in English, in particular those who have lived here for extended periods of time. And in Dr. Kushida's lecture, he asks the question, you know, why does Silicon Valley matter, right? And it's a very engaging lecture that includes examples of Japanese firms coming to Silicon Valley as early as the 1970s. And he gives examples of present-day Japanese entrepreneurs affiliated with small companies coming to Silicon Valley. And Kenji also talks about one hurdle in terms of Japanese coming to Silicon Valley, that is communication in English, right? Okay. The virtual classrooms, this is the actual live synchronous discussions. We use this program called Blue Jeans, and the students meet 2 or 3 times a month on Friday evenings here, okay? And one of our recent speakers, Joe Yasutake, Dr. Yasutake, he was placed in a Japanese-American relocation camp during World War II, and as a 9-year-old boy. And the Japanese high school students were simply so intrigued by his experience. Many hadn't heard about this episode in US history. So we believe that we kind of created a little bit of a disequilibrium in terms of their curriculum from their high school, right? So, and so you could see some of the students here, and they have a chance to actually dialogue with Dr. Yasutake. And one of the things that he's spoken about to students, and I have as well, is the following. If you had 1 week to get ready to leave your home, to leave your work, to leave your school, you know, what would you do? And what would you take? So if you could only take with what you could carry, what would you take? Okay? And I wanted to show you this. So my family was impacted by internment, so-called internment. Some people prefer the term incarceration. So Kenji spoke about terminology, and this is something we discussed with the students as well. Euphemisms, right? And my grandfather brought this bag, which was originally from Hiroshima, and he put a sticker on it because he left port in Yokohama in 1903. So I think he stayed at this hotel, the Fujimatsu Hotel. And this is one of the things that he carried. I don't know what was in it, but this is one of the things he took. So we talk about this with the students, and invariably the students say, "Well, I'm going to bring my dog, or my cat, or some other pet," but that was prohibited. by this executive order. So you could see this image of the dog being taken away. And it's our way to engage the students at a very emotional level, right? And to discuss things like civil rights. And with the Reischauer Scholars Program today, executive orders are being discussed. Okay. John Roos kindly talks to the students in Japan. And I believe this is an excellent example of requiring them to think in English. It's all in English. And not every person, Ambassador Roos does a great job of sort of sheltering his English, making it a little more accessible, but not all of the scholars do that. The students are really forced to think in English. And you'll notice here, Felipe Minami, well, he's a Japanese Brazilian, a descendant of Japanese Brazilians who went to Japan as laborers. So something that we had in mind all along was we wanted the students to learn from each other. So we place a lot of importance upon diversity among the students. So we have Korean, Chinese sometimes enrolled, third generation Korean, third, fourth generation Chinese enrolled in the course. And we believe that this kind of creates a safe space for them to discuss issues of identity, for example. Okay. So there are readings, Japanese and Americans' writings are part of the curriculum. And we sometimes ask them to compare how a particular topic, like the atomic bombing, is covered in Japanese textbooks as compared to US textbooks. There are written assignments, and these are the types of questions we ask. This assignment was given prior to the class, the virtual classroom, on Japanese baseball players in the United States. Okay. And as I mentioned, we sometimes bring both cohorts together. So here's a screenshot of high school students in the US and Japan discussing topics. And it's become very, very popular. And we have the ability, fortunately, to put them in small groups. So here you have Naomi, the teacher of the Reischauer Scholars Program, moderating a discussion between an American and a Japanese. Okay? I mentioned the interactive student discussion forums. In this particular case, the students watched a lecture about Japanese education by a scholar, Catherine Lewis, in both countries. And then we brought students on both sides together to talk about this. And it's really interesting to see their reactions from both sides. Okay. And then they're required to write a final paper. We were concerned about this. We weren't sure if it would be overwhelming for the high school students in Japan because it's all in English. But they've been very successful, fortunately. And so we compile all of their papers and send them to the Japanese students. And sometimes the schools request copies as well. And students, as I mentioned earlier, are required to give presentations about their research. This is true for the Reischauer Scholars Program as well. In fact, last year I had the pleasure of watching 3 Reischauer Scholar students give their presentations at the consulate. And that was their initiative, however, to contact the consulate. Most are done at their schools. So this is true for the high school students in Japan as well. And each year we honor the top students in the Reischauer Scholars Program and in Stanford Japan. And we bring them to Stanford University to give formal presentations of their research. And up until last year, we had separate events. But since this time, we've decided to combine them. And that's proven to be really great because they have a chance to get to know each other. So these are the honorees. Consul General Yamada made opening comments. And we had people from the Stanford community, Japanese community in the Bay Area, Japanese consulate. And these students each gave presentations on their research. And lastly, I hope we have time during the Q&A to talk about scalability. Because since we launched Stanford Japan, several high schools have contacted me asking, can you offer a course only to our students? And so we launched one in Takatsuki, near Osaka. So it's called Stanford Takatsuki. And the course is on global health, because they're affiliated with a medical school. And just this month, we had a group of students and visitors from Shibuya Ward in Tokyo. And they're interested in possibly a course for students in Shibuya. And sometimes the city folks contact me, like prefectural, and also at the prefectural level. And in fact, we launched a course for Tottori Prefecture. It's called Stanford Tottori, the least populated prefecture in Japan. And I think they, just based on my conversations with them, they feel a little isolated. And so I think this Stanford Japan, this Stanford Tottori has helped the prefecture a lot, because the Prefectural Board of Education selects the students for us, right? And finally, we are hoping to get your feedback on not only those areas, but how feasible is this at a university level, right? Okay, so thank you very much. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But I confess I'm a bit confused. Sorry, I'm Jack.
Oh, yeah, could you tell us your name and affiliation?
I'm Jack Mormon. I'm the chairman of U.S.-Japan MedTech Frontiers. So, as I was saying before the microphone, it's a terrific program, very impressive academic program, but I confess I'm a bit confused, and I don't wish to be rude.
Oh, no, it's fine.
But I don't see how the title and Kenji's presentation was about innovation and entrepreneurship. And I frankly do not see how this is accomplishing or is in fact emphasizing that particular goal. Not that it's not possible to do it,
right,
but this looks like an excellent academic program, but I do not see the connection between that and what Kenji said was one of the goals of this program.
Right.
I was hoping for about 3 different types of questions, and this was one of them, and so thank you. Because so how does this directly influence innovation and entrepreneurship? And one set of the conversations that happen a lot from, let's say, there are a couple of billionaires in Japan who have made their own companies and sold them, or they're still running them and they're good. And they all often, these conversations end up with the view that, okay, teaching about innovation and entrepreneurship, that's not the point, because it's a moving target. What you need now, for example, the groups that you mentioned, that's the way we do it now. Was that the way 20 years ago? Is that going to be the way 20 years from now? No, we have to start earlier. We have to start with the critical thinking. So the question of, well, different perspectives, or you're taught something, but why is that? And if you want to know why something is, then how do you form an informed opinion about it? For example, classical Japanese education, over the summer break, you'll have dokusho kansobun, which is the, like you read a book and you write your impressions about it. It's completely unstructured. So people's way of critical thinking isn't facilitated at all. So do you have a question? Here's a question. And here's what I think would help me answer that question. Is it convincing or not? Why would I be convinced one way or the other? What kind of evidence? Is it good evidence? Is it bad? This kind of inquiry, or out of the box thinking. Here's this perspective on this, here's that perspective. This is one, but why did those things happen? And so a lot of these conversations end up at the point of, well, we need to change the educational system to the level of, we need to get kids to think critically, but have the skills to think rigorously. And the current educational system doesn't provide any of that. And so another one of my favorite quotes, because this is a legitimate issue that often comes up, how do we train the youth to optimize for innovation and entrepreneurship, given that innovation and entrepreneurship happens different? The former president of Stanford, Gerhard Casper, I had a long conversation with him on a Shinkansen ride, and he was saying, you know, it's funny because industry people always come to us and say, we need these skills, and you're not training exactly these skills. You must train exactly these skills. And they'll say the latest management vogue. Right now it may be design thinking. A little while ago it might have been lean startup or something like this. And then 5 years later, those people are gone. And it's a different set of executives coming to the president of Stanford saying, we need to learn these skills. So at a certain level, hitting some of the core skills that it takes for, again, critical thinking, being able to think rigorously, logically, empirically. These are the skills that, if it can scale, I think, that eJapan can really provide. And of course, in Silicon Valley, that's one of the trillion-dollar questions, right? In any conversation, if you want to make yourself sound smart, you say, oh, that's a great point. But how does it scale, right? So this is great. So how does it scale? I can think of many mechanisms, but part of the session is to...
And sir, just for information and for everyone's information here, as we conceptualized this course, we weren't thinking solely of, you know, entrepreneurship, cultivating the skills for entrepreneurship. We were thinking that we needed to reach students from various backgrounds with diverse interests. But we decided, of course, to include a lecture by Kenji on Silicon Valley. So it wasn't a course designed specifically to address entrepreneurship, but it has become one of the more popular, as I mentioned, topics in the course. So perhaps we can do more with that, you know. Can we open it up for?
Yeah, that's okay.
My name is Takeshi. I'm a digital language lab manager at the Stanford University. Since the individual school or prefecture level requested some courses, are you planning to change or modify the curriculum design or anything about how you deliver the content materials?
Yes. In the case of Stanford Totori, we created some special lectures that had stronger relevance to Totori Prefecture. And we're planning to add more to it. For example, agriculture. The Stanford Totori course just ended, and we're going to prepare for the second year. And we are going to add, in fact, more lectures. And sometimes we'll consult with the students about what they'd like to learn more about. And as I mentioned earlier, with regard to Stanford Takatsuki, all of the lectures were different from Stanford eJapan. They're all focused on global health-related topics. So yes, I think that's a really important thing to do. I've been trying to launch a program with Okinawa, and if we do that, things like defense, right, could be an important topic to do more on.
Thank you, Mukai-san. Great presentation. And my name is Tomokuni Hasegawa from Daikin, America. Daikin is an air conditioning company. And I want to understand more in Japan. So I have a few questions. Sorry. Is this a one-year program or two?
We offer 2 courses per year.
2 courses per
year. Two courses per year.
And this
about 4 to 5 months.
I get you. And is this a focus to the high school student or mainly high school student?
Correct.
And previous question, you told to us that this course can modify to each customer or each school, right? So my question is it possible to modify to the company? Because now our company want to move to the abroad to overseas. So my concern is many Japanese afraid of to move to the overseas. So I believe that this program support to the easy to move to overseas. So if possible, so this course should modify to the company some training for new employee or something. It's very helpful for us. Yeah.
Thank you for your comment. You want to comment on that? I think that's a really great idea. Some company officials have approached me about that, but we haven't done anything yet. By the way, I think I mentioned this, but we currently have a 3-year grant from the U.S.-Japan Foundation to offer Stanford e-Japan. And this is the last year of the grant. So depending upon funding, we may have to, only offer the course once per year from next year. So I'm not sure about that. But even if we do, we'll be happy about that. It's just that it'll be more competitive for the students. Currently, the course is free to the students. But, this is sort of related to Jack's question. When I often meet with companies like, next month I'll be meeting with Fujitsu. And actually, they're quite interested in hearing not only about Silicon Valley specifically, but also about history. Right? They're quite interested in this. In fact, some of them requested for me to talk about what was Silicon Valley like before it became Silicon Valley. It's like that, and there were Japanese American farmers. And I think this type of knowledge can help them, right?
Yes, right.
Yeah. And so if we were to do something with corporations, I think there would still be a degree of historical context that would be important. Right? Like teaching about trade frictions between the U.S. and Japan. I think that would be important. The so-called Japan bashing time. Right? Be interesting to examine that, I think. Thank you for your question.
Thank you so much.
My name is Heather On in Korea program. I'm just curious. So, what are those 2 other questions that you were hoping to get besides this first question? Because questions are sometimes more important than the answers themselves. So I'm so curious.
I paid Heather before this one. So, and I also paid our friend from Daikin because I was hoping somebody would say, can you offer this kind of thing as a continuing studies thing? So wouldn't it be valuable not just, because I don't see why this can't be offered to universities if universities are interested. The question is whether universities would be comfortable outsourcing some of their curriculum. And for universities that are sort of top tier, this might be difficult because they hire people to do exactly this. For universities that would like to, and their shrinking population, it's a bit of a crisis, so they don't have the faculty immediately. Wouldn't it be great to be able to offer a course through here? So I was hoping the question would be, well, so what kind of university presence are you looking at? And the way I see it, there are all sorts of universities that are trying to find their own competitive niches. And if this was one of them, that would be great. And I think it's value added in both ways. And that could be structured in various different ways. For university, people talk to each other. People, if there's any counterpart over here, high school, university, all sorts of potential. So,
related to this, earlier this year, I gave a couple lectures at the University of Tokyo. And it was geared to the faculty. However, some students came. And one of the challenges that are facing universities like Tokyo University, Waseda, Osaka, universities that are trying to attract more foreign students, is that with an increasingly diverse student body, you know, how can the faculty best meet their needs, right? Because like the Americans whom I met at Tokyo University, were having kind of a hard time with the traditional teaching methods that they were experiencing at Tokyo University, right? So I think there's some promise here. The students asked me if we could offer a course called Stanford E Todai, Stanford E Tokyo University, on some of these topics. So the Japanese government has a program, I'm sure you know, called the Global 30, right? And certain universities have been identified, you know, to become more international and to hopefully attract more students from abroad. And the University of Tokyo has a program called PEAK, Programs in English at Komaba, one of the Tokyo University campuses, Komaba. So students can earn a degree in English, right? But sort of related to what Kenji was saying earlier, even if many of the professors are bilingual, perfectly capable in English, they might not necessarily be able to communicate effectively because their teaching style is so different from what the students are accustomed. You know. So sorry, that was a.
Thank you. My name is Hatim, and I work for a venture called Spire Ventures, basically in health science. And but the whole discussion was very, very interesting for me. We work a lot with European and Canadian companies, and we try to help them navigate the Silicon Valley ecosystem. And my question is related to the two questions that were asked earlier. I completely understand Kenji's point of trying to basically early on at the high school level help the critical thinking of students that are going to be the future of Japan and have them to be more open. But what about the urgent matter of today? You know, if it's hard to get to universities because they want to teach their content, then what Jack mentioned, I think, is pertinent, where you have last month, actually, there was a delegation that came with NEDO on companies that were in health science, and they pitched and they tried to understand the ecosystem. And there's an urgent need today for them to understand the Silicon Valley and the entrepreneurship here. And are you guys thinking of doing something for corporations as well as for startups that are looking to understand the perspective here? Because the needs, you know, there's a need in the future that you guys are addressing, but there's also a need today that needs to be addressed.
So I paid you because that's the third question I was hoping, which was, but there was a second part to it that I was, which was, so we urgently need a course on Silicon Valley, and that incorporates a lot of the lessons that we learn from teaching, and because teaching, it's process and methodology as well as content. So you can have lectures about how Silicon Valley works, and that's one. But if it were also bundled with interactive sessions where critical thinking, multiple perspectives, that would be great. So I was hoping that the question would be, yeah, can you offer something on Silicon Valley, and will you accept a modest check of a large sum so that you can actually do this? Will you let us fund it? That was what I was hoping that the second part of the third question. But
So you're going to pay me so I can pay you back to do it.
exactly. Your employer is going to pay us, and we'll pay. So, but yeah. So my thought in starting to figure out various ways to partner with SPICE was, of course, we are an educational institution, so it's a little different from let's make a series of corporate training things. That being said, continuing education is a prime mission, one of the prime missions of the university, and it's a mission of any proper educational institution. And it's part of the Stanford Silicon Valley New Japan project to figure out how to build bridges. And through learning and things like that, that's clearly one of the bridges. So my reaction would be, we're gauging thermometer temperatures to see what the interest level would be. And so thank you for that, yeah. If there's anything, yeah, and then last one maybe.
So does it make sense in this context? Does it make sense in this context to partner with Stanford Business School or something like that? And this also may be viewed as something like what happened in the 80s or 90s, where American companies were learning from Japanese techniques for continuous improvement and so on. So,
yeah, the business school has their own big set of operations that they do, and they have a set of things, and they're not plugged into something that comes from high school education, for example. And it's worth exploring, for sure. And yeah, and certainly some of the professors at business school, for example, would be interested in reaching an audience in Japan to have this interaction. And so, yeah, that's a great suggestion. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Last one.
I'm Yoji Fukuda from Daikin Industries. So I grew up in Ibaraki City, next to Takatsuki City in Osaka. And 12 years ago, when I was a high school student, I joined the exchange program, and I moved to Sacramento and received the exchange program and summer school. But now I'm a member of Daikin, not entrepreneur. So what is the difference with exchange program and your e-chat or so what is the difference? There are any advantage?
Well, in the case of Stanford e-Japan, most of the communication is over the computer. So the students actually don't travel as you did to places. That said, it's interesting for me to hear that, in fact, many of the students do get together. And sometimes when students in Japan make family trips to places like LA or New York, they get together with their peers in the Reischauer Scholars Program. So there isn't an element of actual, visitation. So it's electronic. And I think there's an advantage in that. It's a lot cheaper. but there's certainly nothing like actually visiting a place, The other things that I like about this program is that students from different parts of Japan are able to participate, and they really learn a lot from each other. And with many of the exchange programs that I've been on, they tend to come from a particular region. which is great too. But what I am especially interested in with Stanford Japan is you have students from all over Japan interacting with students from all over the United States. But there certainly are pluses and minuses too. We're hoping to inspire the students in the United States and the students in Japan to actually study abroad, to physically go abroad at some point, either for college or for graduate school. Right? And increasingly that seems to be taking place because programs like PEAK, that's the University of Tokyo, offer degree programs in English. So more of our students in the Reischauer Scholars Program are actually considering that. But for most students in the US, it's not in their mind to think about possibly going to undergraduate school to Japan. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us.